Click on the subscribe button to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, and engage in our comments. I don't know when things started to get blurry between me and Mr. Bryant. Maybe it was that Friday evening we both stayed late, alone in the office, and he offered me a glass of wine from the bottle he kept locked in his desk. Or maybe it started way earlier, when I noticed how he always looked at me a second too long during meetings, how he stood a little too close when passing behind me, how his compliments always came laced with something unspoken. Mr. Bryant was my boss, technically my regional manager, but he had authority over my entire department. He was confident, intimidating in a way that made people sit straighter and speak carefully when he walked into a room. He had this deep, calm voice that made even bad news sound like a conversation over dinner. And yes, he was handsome. Not the type I usually noticed. Tall, dark, muscular, like someone from a magazine cover. But it wasn't just that. It was the way he carried himself, always in control. I'd been working at the company for 4 years, married for 6. I was the dependable type, never missed a deadline, always polite, never stepped out of line. Until I started noticing how often I caught myself smiling when I saw his name pop up on my phone, how I touched up my makeup before stepping into his office, how I stayed just a little later than I had to if I knew he was still around. It was subtle at first. He'd call me into his office and ask for help with something he could have easily asked anyone else. I'd catch him looking at me from across the break room. And then one day, he asked if I could help him go over some quarterly reports after hours. Everyone else had left. The office lights were off, except in his corner. He poured me that glass of wine. I didn't say no. We didn't talk about work that night. He asked about my husband, what he did, how we met. I told him we'd been having a hard time lately, which was more honesty than I should have given him. He nodded, listened, didn't interrupt. He told me about his divorce, how messy it was, how lonely the house felt sometimes. We both laughed about the ridiculous coffee in the break room. It felt easy. Too easy. At one point, our knees brushed under the desk. Neither of us moved. The room felt smaller all of a sudden, like something was slowly pressing in. His hand lingered when he handed me another folder. Our fingers touched. We both paused. I knew what was happening. I just didn't know how far I'd let it go. Then his phone buzzed, loud and sharp, and the moment passed. He stood, walked around the desk, and thanked me for staying late. Said I could go. His tone was polite again. Professional, like nothing had happened. But something had, and we both knew it. I drove home that night with my chest tight and my hands sweating on the steering wheel. I didn't tell my husband anything. I barely spoke at all. I kept replaying that almost touch, the way his eyes had held mine for just a beat too long, the silence thick with everything we didn't say. I told myself it was nothing, just tension, just a long day. But deep down, I knew better, and I knew it wasn't over. I tried to avoid him the following week. I buried myself in tasks, sat through meetings without making eye contact, and even scheduled my lunch breaks around when I knew he'd be out. But of course, it didn't last. You can't really avoid your boss. Not one like Mr. Bryant. He called me into his office again, casually, like nothing strange had happened the week before. I almost said no, but I didn't. "Close the door," he said when I stepped in. That small request, innocent on the surface, somehow made my throat dry. I did it anyway. He leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed, like he was in control of everything, including me. "You've been distant," he said plainly, like he was asking about the weather. I just shrugged. "Just tired, I guess." He didn't buy it. "You sure?" I nodded, even though we both knew it was a lie. Then he stood and came around the desk, leaning back against the edge, folding his arms. "If I crossed a line the other night, you can tell me. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." The truth was, he hadn't made me uncomfortable. That was the problem. What he made me feel was something I didn't want to name. Seen, desired, awake. I should have shut it down. I should have smiled, said we were good, and walked out. But instead, I found myself saying, "You didn't cross a line." His gaze didn't break. Good. There was this silence that hung in the air like smoke, thick, slow, curling into all the places I didn't want it to reach. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. "You're different when you talk about your husband." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You sound tired, like you're trying to convince yourself everything's fine." That felt too personal, too raw. I looked away. "That's not really your business." He nodded slowly, still watching me. "You're right, it's not." But even as he said that, I could feel it. He wasn't pulling away. He was getting closer without moving an inch. That week, I kept thinking about the way he looked at me. Not just in his office, but everywhere. At the copier, in the hallway. It was like we were playing a game with no name, a slow dance towards something we couldn't say out loud. And I wasn't just letting it happen. I was leaning into it. My husband noticed. One night, as we lay in bed with our backs to each other, he said, "You've been somewhere else lately." I told him I was just stressed. He nodded, rolled over, and didn't press. That used to bother me, that he never asked more than once. A few days later, Mr. Bryant asked me to accompany him on a client visit. Out of town, just the two of us. It was for a pitch meeting, nothing unusual. But I hesitated just for a second. He noticed. "It's work," he said, smiling faintly. "Strictly business." I agreed. Of course I did. We left early in the morning. The drive was long, and I thought I'd be tense the whole way, but it wasn't like that. We talked about random things, music, old movies, childhood stories. It was easy, too easy. And then we stopped at a diner halfway through. Just breakfast, just coffee. I should have felt safe. But when we got back in the car, something shifted. His hand brushed mine when I reached for the aux cable. He didn't move it away, and I didn't either. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was loaded. The meeting itself was a blur. I hardly remember what was said. What I do remember is checking into the hotel that evening. 2 separate rooms, just like he promised. But when he handed me my key, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'll be down at the bar in 20 minutes, if you want to join me." No pressure, no expectation. But I still stood there with the key in my hand, heart pounding, wondering if I'd already made a decision just by showing up. 25 minutes later, I walked into that bar. I told myself it was just a drink. But deep down, I knew better. And as soon as I saw him there, alone at a booth, watching me walk in with that unreadable expression on his face, I knew the night wasn't going to end the way it started. The bar was dim, quiet, with that soft hum of clinking glasses and low conversation that made everything feel slower, more private. I spotted him right away, Mr. Bryant, sitting with one arm stretched across the back of the booth, drink in hand. His shirt sleeves rolled just enough to reveal the veins in his forearms. He looked like he belonged there, like the room wrapped around him. When he saw me, he didn't smile, not right away. He just nodded once, subtle, like he'd known all along I'd show up. I slid into the booth across from him. "You took your time," he said, that low voice of his even more dangerous when he wasn't in the office. I wasn't sure if I was coming. He raised his glass. "But here you are." I didn't know how to respond, so I just looked down at my menu, pretending I cared what I was going to order. But he wasn't pretending anything. His eyes were on me the entire time, and I could feel it, the weight of it, like he was reading every page I didn't want anyone to see. We ordered drinks, talked, laughed even, and somewhere between the second round and a shared plate of fries, something shifted. We stopped pretending. I caught myself leaning in. He brushed a crumb from my cheek, and his fingers lingered just a second too long. It sent a pulse through me so strong I felt it in my knees. "I've been trying not to do this," he said suddenly. "Do what?" "This. Us. Whatever this is." I swallowed hard. "There is no us," I said, even though it came out softer than I meant it to. He leaned closer across the table. "Maybe not, but it feels like there could be." There was a pause, the kind that sits between two people like an invitation. "Don't," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I'm not the one who came down here," he said, and that's when I realized I'd crossed something invisible, not just a line, a threshold, the space between innocent and something else entirely. We didn't say much after that. The silence between us said enough. He walked me back to my room. Not because I asked him to, but because it felt inevitable, and I let it happen. We stopped at my door. I fumbled with the key card, my fingers clumsy, and he stood behind me, close, too close. His voice was right by my ear. "If you open that door, I'm not walking in, not unless you ask me to." I should have turned around and told him good night, but instead, I stood there frozen, with the key card hovering at the lock, heart racing like a drum inside my chest. My hand dropped to my side, and I turned around. He was staring at me like he could see every thought running through my head, every crack in my marriage, every inch of longing I had no right to feel. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Then his hand reached up, slow, deliberate, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His thumb grazed my jaw. And then, just before it happened, just before he kissed me, I heard a voice from down the hallway. A group of people, laughing. We jumped apart like guilty teenagers. I turned, heart pounding, and swiped the key. The green light blinked. I stepped in, alone, shutting the door before I could even think. Inside, I pressed my back against it, breathing like I'd just run a mile. He hadn't come in. He'd kept his word. But I hadn't said no, and that scared me more than anything else. That night, I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, every nerve still buzzing. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try, because I knew the next morning things wouldn't go back to normal. And whatever line we hadn't crossed yet, it was getting thinner by the second. The morning after didn't feel real. I showed up at work like I was playing a part in a movie I hadn't agreed to star in. Everything looked the same. The receptionist's awkward wave, the blinking lights on my computer, the faint scent of overpriced coffee in the air. But I wasn't the same, not even close. He walked in late. Of course he did, like he owned the room. I was trying not to look at him, but my eyes betrayed me. Every time he moved, every time his voice carried across the floor, something inside me reacted. Like a reflex I couldn't shut off. He didn't speak to me the entire morning, not a word, which somehow made it worse. It made me feel like the one who had crossed the line, even though we hadn't. Not really. Just before lunch, I got the message. "Come to my office. Now." My heart dropped. The walk to his office felt like miles. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. The door was already cracked open, and he was standing by the window, back to me. When he turned, he didn't smile. "Close the door," he said. I did, slowly, trying not to let my hands shake. "I can't stop thinking about last night," he said. I stayed quiet. I shouldn't say this, I know that. But I'm not going to lie to you either. I haven't been able to think straight since you walked out of that hotel room. I tried to keep my voice even, Nothing happened. His eyes burned into me, didn't it? And that was the thing. That was the part I couldn't argue. Because even though we hadn't kissed, hadn't touched beyond a few lingering seconds, it felt like something had happened. Something big. Something that wouldn't go back into the box we'd tried to keep it in. "I've never done anything like this," I whispered. He stepped closer. Me either. He was inches away now, too close again, always too close. "I'm married," I said, as if that were enough to make the tension disappear. It wasn't. "I know," he said. "So am I." I blinked. "What?" He let out a breath, frustrated. "We never talk about it. Nobody here knows. I don't wear a ring. But yeah, I've got someone at home." That hit harder than I expected. Maybe because I had been convincing myself I was the only one risking something. That I was the one being pulled into something I didn't understand. But it wasn't just me. It was both of us. We were already so far in, and I hadn't even seen it. His hand brushed against mine. Barely. But it was enough to start that slow burn again. "I need to know if this is over," he said. I looked at him. Really looked. And I realized I didn't want it to be, but I also didn't know how to live with myself if it wasn't. "I don't know," I said honestly. He leaned in like he was going to kiss me. Right there, in the office, in broad daylight, and I froze. My breath caught. I wanted him to. God, I wanted him to. But a knock on the door shattered everything. I jumped back. He stepped away. We looked at each other like criminals. "Yeah?" he called out, voice suddenly composed. It was Melissa from HR. "I need 5 minutes. It's urgent." "Give me a second," he called. He turned back to me, jaw clenched. "This conversation isn't over," he said under his breath. And then I was gone, down the hall, heart slamming, every nerve alive. I went home early that day, called in sick, stood in the shower for almost an hour, trying to wash off everything I was feeling. But it didn't work. The heat, the steam, it only made me think of him, of how close we'd gotten. That night, I got the email. "We need to finish what we started, one way or another, tonight." I stared at it for a long time. Then I packed a small bag, told my husband I was running to the store, and drove. Not to the store, not even to the gym, to the address he'd sent me. A quiet apartment complex, upscale, a little too perfect. I parked and sat in my car for 5 full minutes, watching the light in the upstairs window. His light. He was waiting. My hands were shaking when I finally opened the car door. I climbed the stairs one step at a time, like the universe was daring me to turn back. But I didn't. And then I was at his door. I lifted my hand, ready to knock. But the door opened before I even touched it. He was standing there, looking down at me like he'd already made up his mind. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. He reached for me. And that's when my phone rang, loud, echoing through the silence. It was my husband. I froze. He never called this late. I stared at the screen, heart racing, caught between two worlds. Mr. Bryant's voice was low, steady. "Don't answer it," he said. But I couldn't move. My hand hovered over the screen. The call kept ringing. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. And just before it went to voicemail, I answered. If you want more real, emotional stories like this one, stick around. You might just hear one that hits close to home. Subscribe for more.